Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today's interview is part 2 of a 3-part interview series with licensed marriage and family therapist Melissa Mose. And we're focusing on helping parents of teens with OCD find specific ways to successfully help their teens succeed in overcoming OCD. Now, the title of today's interview is Mistakes Every Mom of a Teenager with OCD Needs to Avoid. Now, Melissa is a well-known expert on the subject of getting help for teens with OCD and has graciously agreed to this interview as well as the series. But in this interview in particular, she's going to be sharing her extensive knowledge and experience to help us avoid the most common and the most damaging mistakes in this area so that every mom of a teenager can understand 3 specific ways to help your teen succeed in overcoming OCD. So, Melissa, thank you again for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Okay. Well, let's jump right in. I now normally would start off with background questions for our guest, but because this is a 3-part interview series, we covered the background questions during part 1. So for any listeners who have not yet heard part 1, I would definitely encourage you to listen to the first interview, which is about the biggest myths and misconceptions regarding teen OCD, so that you can get those additional background details. However, I do want to mention briefly that Melissa, unlike many other therapists who work with teens with OCD, actually has a daughter with OCD. So she not only brings an extensive educational background, she also brings real-life, day-in, day-out experience to the table, which is, in my book, a huge difference in the quality of the advice that she's able to give our listeners. So let's go ahead and dive into those mistakes and try to get those cleared up for some people here. First of all, what is the most common mistake, would you say, that parents make in the area of helping their teens with OCD?
Well, I think it's the most common mistake is kind of the most common mistake we deal with in most communications with people across the spectrum, not just in OCD, but it's what I call, why don't you just fill in the blank, and in various different areas. But with OCD, it's why don't you just stop doing those compulsions, or why don't you just realize, can't you just realize that that's not necessary? Don't you know that you don't really have to do that? Think about it. Tapping 3 times really isn't going to have any effect on the future whatsoever. It's that rationalizing about the compulsions that pretty much every parent makes at some point or another, and I think a lot of therapists make it too. It's so tempting. Mm-hmm. Very easy mistake to make.
So I'm thinking that along those lines, though, it would also maybe even come down to whether or not they've actually had a diagnosis of OCD, or
even with a diagnosis.
After they know?
Absolutely. Okay. Even with a diagnosis, even as a therapist, I can admit I fall into it sometimes. Like you know you don't need to do that, right? It's even when you know it's a brain-based, brain chemistry kind of disorder, and that it isn't about just having more willpower or strength or understanding about the situation. It's just OCD is such an irrational thing, or it appears to be, that it's very difficult to not just try and reason with people. And they reason with themselves all the time as well. But rationalizing, trying to explain it, trying to make sense of it is a big mistake because it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay. So why do you think people make this mistake?
Well, I think that, as I said, I think it's a natural mistake to make. Most things in life are things that we have some control over, even if they're things that we don't, we wish we hadn't done. We make bad choices, and then we try harder. Mm-hmm. We want to exercise, we don't exercise, and we just know that we need a little bit more self-control and a little more willpower to resist the chocolate cake or go out for a run. Try harder, get your homework done, try harder. Most things are behaviors that we have control over. And so when somebody gets up and goes to the bathroom to wash their hands for the 10th time in the last half hour, it's easy to think, well, you're getting up and you're going there. You obviously have a choice in the matter. Why not just don't? So, so it's very natural that it looks like it's a choice. And in a sense that it is a choice, but it's so compelling, that's the word compulsion, that it's a very difficult choice to resist.
Gotcha.
Even the thinking ones, things that people tell themselves in their mind over and over. One of the common ones is, well, why don't you just think about something different or have more positive thoughts? And, those in particular are very difficult to control, the intrusive thought kinds of compulsions, or the mental compulsions, as we call them, where we're trying to undo thoughts or think about things in order to fix other situations.
Gotcha.
We're just used to thinking you should be able to control your own mind.
Okay. So then what are the consequences of parents making a mistake like this?
Well, I think that the initial feeling for somebody with OCD is just you don't understand. So feeling misunderstood is nobody wants to feel misunderstood. But I think when it's already they don't really understand themselves why they have to do it. They know they shouldn't have to do it. When you say something like that, it's deflating. They just really feel like you don't understand. And I think the other thing is that teens in particular might think that it's a comment on them being weak. Like, well, why don't you just do this? What's wrong with you? It's almost like I guess it makes them feel just alone and misunderstood, and like they should be doing something that they're not. And that I think that just damages the relationship with a parent or whoever's saying that, and it makes makes a person feel like they just nobody gets it.
Okay. So do you run into situations where if a parent is doing this, okay, and out of, not knowing any better or whatever, that when they're saying this to the child and the child does start having the feelings that you've just described, does that sometimes maybe lead to resistance on the part of the child moving forward with other things that the parent tries to, do or help with?
Yeah, it definitely can lead to resistance. In particular, it tends to make it go underground, because I think that if a kid thinks that you're not going to get it anyway, they're not going to tell you. It's why bother to tell you what's going on if you're just going to tell me to try harder? It leads to resistance. It leads to anger, resentment.
Okay.
And
what would you recommend that parents do instead?
Well, I think sometimes you can't resist making a comment like that, but you can couch it in terms like, I know this is not the case, but couldn't you just or acknowledge that that's your temptation and that's how you feel, and you realize that really you can learn over time to not do the compulsions, and that it takes a lot of effort. And I think to say that out loud is important, and to reward even the very small steps, or just to even reflect back. I think can be very healing for somebody to say, it must be so strange to know that you don't have to do that, and then to feel like you have to do it anyway. Just a statement of understanding, or I don't understand this. Acknowledging that you don't understand. It's hard for me to understand why you need to do this, but I get that you do.
Okay.
Those kinds of comments, I think, are lead to a lot more understanding and feel like a lot more moral support than the other.
Okay, so and that sounds like a good step for parents to take if they've already made this mistake as well.
Absolutely. To once again, apologize. That's always a good start. I'm sorry. This must make you crazy when I say this. I know you would if you could. And then to open up, I think the one extra step, if you've already been doing this kind of a lot, to open up that it's okay to tell me, remind me if I'm doing this. It's okay. If I start doing this again, it's really okay to tell me to stop.
Gotcha.
I think, making it really safe to say, hey, I get it. I would if I could.
Yeah, and that makes sense because again, we've got our own patterns that we have as well, and sometimes just a gentle reminder that hey, we have had this discussion already. Here's the way I need you to handle this, essentially. Exactly,
and I think setting the stage for this is a collaboration, especially with a teenager.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's move on to question number 2. What would you say then is the second most common mistake that you see parents making?
Trying too hard to be helpful. And this is, again, another mistake that parents make with all teens.
Why is that a mistake? Isn't that what we're supposed to do as parents?
Well, kind of. But if you even take it out of the context of OCD and think of the parent who sits down and practically does their kids' homework for them, right?
Yep.
Or I've got a big report due Friday, I haven't started yet, and the parent does the report for them. Or that kind of thing. A general rule of thumb for parenting in general is to never do something for your kid, your child, or your teen especially, that they can do for themselves. And I guess it's true with toddlers as well. If you carried them around, they'd never learn to walk. And so the same concept, the same concept really applies here. And there's two kinds of ends to it. One is, and we talked about it a little bit in the last interview, is the accommodation syndrome, where parents try to reduce the anxiety by doing the rituals for them practically. It's like, okay, you can't stand this particular area, so we won't go there. Or I know you don't like to open doors, so I'll open them for you. That's one way that parents try too hard to help.
Okay.
But the one I most want to talk about right now is the mistake of kind of overcorrecting for accommodation, which is along the lines of the helicopter parenting I was describing with kids in general. Kind of taking over the responsibility for the recovery, basically, being overly enthusiastic, watching the kids like a hawk, labeling every behavior they do as a compulsion and saying, well, you're doing it again. Or any kind of getting too involved in helping them do their homework, their OCD therapy homework, for instance. It's this kind of helping, I think, that actually is a very easy mistake to make on the other end of the spectrum once somebody's already involved in treatment.
Gotcha. I'm trying to find that balance. I bet it's very difficult too, though.
It really is. It's a very tough thing to do, and with OCD, I think it's so mysterious because it again is that totally irrational thing. You're like you're Alice in Wonderland, and things don't really look like they're supposed to, and so it's very hard. Parents often say to me, I don't know I just don't even know what to do. My instinct is to go be helpful, and that I know I'm not supposed to do that, but then they get so mad if I don't help, and it's a very difficult balance to strike. But again, I think trying to zoom out and have some perspective and look at it like you would any other child who's trying to learn something that is a slow learning process. You help just enough, but basically, try not to watch them like a hawk, and zoom in and comment on every little compulsion.
Okay. Do you have what different ways or what ways do you have to help parents with that?
Well, it is tough because the general rule of thumb that I teach parents when I'm working with them is to think of it on a scale of Well, I guess the first step is to step back and basically just remind yourself over and over again that this is their job. It's not. You have to let them do it on their own, and basically think of the family's main homework is just to leave the person alone to do what they have to do in their own way and in their own time. So that's really the first step. But just step back and leave them alone. Stop trying to control the process, being overinvested in the outcome. Realize your job is not to nag, especially, when it's cleaning your room or doing your homework, yes, it's a parent's job to nag because we're trying to instill good behavioral habits. This is different because being controlling or nagging as a way to motivate somebody, it's too much pressure when you're dealing with OCD, which is essentially an anxiety disorder, and you really have no idea how overburdened they already are. And you also don't have any way of knowing how hard they actually are trying, because a lot of the effort is going on in their head in a way that you don't even really recognize that they're struggling. So I guess how to do it is first to know that it's okay to step back, and it's not your job to help them with this OCD recovery. Sometimes I think parents need a lot more support of their own outside of, the family, maybe their own therapy or their own work in order to grapple with the anxiety that creates in them. But then the other piece of it is, thinking about the scale from 1 to 10 and how much despair is your child in at the moment, and pushing them if they're not optimally motivated a little bit. But if it's off the charts and they're 8, 9, 10 level of distress, that's a time to be helpful, because that's something they can't do on their own.
Okay,
so,
gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, as a parent myself, I think another way to look at it, because it's very difficult when you see your child struggling and you know that you could step in and help. One thing being a time frame issue, I know sometimes,
right.
When you've got something else that needs to get done as well, you just step in and just want to get the solution just
True.
get it over with as quickly as possible. But the other thing I think, especially with a situation like this, is I think if you think about it from a parent's perspective of telling yourself, hey, you know what, I'm trying to get my child ready to move on, at 18, 19, when they, are ready to leave the house, that they're actually ready and can handle these things on their own. I think maybe that mentality from the parent's perspective might be helpful in helping them try to step back. Because, boy, I'm right there with them with the, wanting to jump in and help. That's for sure.
Right. Well, and you alluded to another really key factor in this whole thing, which is sometimes the teen with OCD is not your only child, and therefore is not your only concern. And you've got 2 other kids that also need to get to school on time, or they get in trouble. And so this isn't any simple thing I'm asking, or suggesting. It's sometimes very, very complicated, and it's always a matter of picking your battles. But you're absolutely right that we constantly are reminding ourselves that trying to keep up with the development, that whereas I used to need to go get the water for my little girl, now she can do it herself, and what's more, she needs to. And if you don't want to send a kid out into the world who isn't really ready to do these things on their own.
Okay, so you've kind of covered the tips as far as, first you want to step back and really think about what you're doing so that you don't overcorrect. What other tips would you recommend for parents, especially if they've already, again, kind of have gone down this route and they're already making this mistake? What kind of suggestions do you have to help them fix it without, overcorrecting again in the other direction where they just completely pull out of the way?
Right. Well, I think, mentally checking yourself if you find yourself overly enthusiastic or overly perfectionistic about it being done. There are little cues, I think, sometimes if you find yourself not recognizing the success, but pointing out the ways in which they still need to be improving. To just it's about catching yourself, and then I think again at the bottom of it all is maintaining the relationship, which involves acknowledging that you're human and that you're going to make a mistake and apologizing. And to really be able to keep your morale up and say, I know you're doing your best, and so am I.
All right. Well, let's move on to question number 3, which is, in your opinion, what are the most damaging mistakes that parents make that might actually interfere with the progress of their teens and their ability to, successfully overcome OCD or deal with it?
Well, on the one hand, since I always go back to the accommodation issue as potentially crippling in terms of if you accommodate and enable the OCD, it does just keep getting worse and worse and worse.
Okay.
We have already addressed that, but in terms of the treatment and the recovery of somebody who's in therapy and working on their OCD, I think the most damaging mistakes that you can make is have to do with expressing your own frustration with the process and essentially being angry with the kid instead of being angry at the OCD. It starts with just having unrealistic goals. I hear a lot, like, how long is this going to take? And how soon should I expect progress?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sure understandable. It's because, again, your whole family is being impacted.
Mm-hmm.
But, expecting it to change instantly is definitely a mistake, and it increases pressure, increases stress, and it's just never helpful. So that's one aspect of this, how parents sometimes express their own frustration in ways that aren't helpful. Another is to suggest that your teen isn't really trying hard enough.
Okay.
It's a serious problem, and it doesn't always improve in a straight line. So sometimes you see, like anything else, something gets better, and you take 2 or 3 steps forward, but then you take a step back. And I think a mistake that parents make is to focus on that step back. Mm-hmm. And say, those slip-ups, why you're not trying. You could do this yesterday. Why couldn't you do it today? But as you know, if you go learn any kind of a new skill, you have good days and you have days in which it doesn't go as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that comes from fear, that, again, the belief that we should be able to control this process, and if it goes backwards, somebody is doing something wrong. So, that's another form of negativity. I think sometimes it goes even a little further than that, where parents start to blame the kid with OCD for making things difficult for the whole family, and that's really damaging because they feel badly enough already that they know everybody's bending over backwards to help them, or sometimes families can't go certain places, or they're asking the whole family to not say certain things, and family members get angry, mm-hmm. and teens with OCD are perceiving all of this, and they feel bad about it enough. So, the frustration of, now we can't go on this vacation because of this, being very careful not to blame the kid instead of the OCD. It's a tough thing. It's just, you don't want to trigger more blame, more shame, and then I think the last last thing on my list in terms of mistakes that are damaging is when parents threaten.
Okay.
And they think, well, if you don't if you don't do your OCD homework, I'm going to go in your room and I'm going to mess everything up. Or we're going to, it's almost, and it's surprising to say that parents would actually do this, but it does come up a fair amount where, they basically use the person suffering with OCD's fears as leverage, as a way of kind of punishing them for.
Wow, that's surprising.
The annoying symptoms. Yeah, it's really tough when I see that happen, and I think it comes from feeling out of control, but really it's just cruel.
Yeah.
And but fortunately that doesn't happen as much, and it's pretty easy to stop that one. Yeah,
I can imagine. I can see kind of where it almost makes a little bit of sense, but I'm with you. It's more of a cruelty thing. But like, I've told you not to, spend so much time on your phone, so you take the phone away, kind of a thing. So I can kind of see that. But wow, yeah, that would be, knowing how much distress that can cause the child is not commensurate to what it is you're trying to achieve. So.
Right. I think, like you're saying, it is one thing to threaten a kid with taking the car or the phone, frankly, I think punishment really doesn't work ever, but it certainly doesn't work with someone with OCD.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on here to the last question for today's interview. What mistakes do you see parents make where they think in their minds that they're actually doing the right thing and they don't even realize that it's a mistake that they're making?
And it's an interesting question because I think that all of these mistakes are things that parents do thinking they're being helpful. That's why they're mistakes. They're not, they're trying to help and they don't realize that helping too much doesn't help, or that trying to motivate through fear and pressure or shame and blame doesn't help. I think sometimes parents really do think that, like a coach, coaches are notorious for motivating using criticism, and so I think all of these mistakes are ones where parents, really are trying to just do anything they can to make some progress, and I think it happens because, the brain is built for efficiency. We try and we use shortcuts, right? So we don't always think things through. And even parents, we really aren't perfect. And so I think all of these kind of fall into that category.
So what would be
acknowledging that?
I'm sorry.
Just acknowledging that it's a mistake. I made a mistake is really the key.
Okay, and that's probably the best way for them to move forward in preventing these mistakes is now that they've actually got them in a list here that they can recognize them if and when they're making them.
Absolutely, and I just want to emphasize that all of us, myself included, and I'm a therapist who works with this day in and day out. As a parent, I make these mistakes. I know them. I can talk to you about them. But I just want to say to parents to not be too hard on yourself when you make a mistake. It's all about repair, rupture and repair. And there is a learning in that is valuable in that kids learn that people make mistakes. And when you make a mistake, you say, I'm sorry. And then you try not to make it again. So I think that's an important piece. Just because you know that these are mistakes doesn't mean you aren't going to make them.
So true. We're all human. We're all going to be making mistakes. So
right.
Well, thank you so much for another great interview. I am sure that all the moms of teenagers out there in the audience have a much clearer understanding of the mistakes that they may be making right now and how they can help to identify those and also to avoid them in the future. So I, again, want to thank you very, very much for sharing your expertise and experiences with us today.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to invite you to check out www.melissamoseft.com/resources today for more information on how you can succeed with getting help for your teens with OCD and providing them with the right support that they need to overcome OCD so that they can enjoy the happy and healthy lives we all want for our kids. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.